Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I want to talk a little bit about a new kick that I've been on. It's kind of an old kick, come back around again. So lately I have been really drawn to working with my Rider-Waite-Smith with Pixie's artwork, and I've really been enjoying kind of reconnecting with that kind of classic energy of the tarot. So the edition that I've had previously, the first Rider-Waite-Smith I ever had, I think, was the Universal, and I didn't really care for that one or the backs. This is my Centennial. As you can see, I have multiple copies of this deck. This one's actually my reading copy in the full size, which I bought a few years ago, and then I also have the tin version, which lives in my bedroom. It's no longer in a tin, it's in a Danny bag. And I work with that deck almost every single night. So working with the original Rider-Waite-Smith and working with Pixie's artwork has been something that I've been doing for a really long time. It's not something I talk about very often. I think occasionally I've mentioned the little tin version in various tags and videos because, you know, if I'm talking about the decks I use the most, I use that one almost every single night. I do use my Centennial full size quite often. I have a second copy of it because this is my reference deck and I always keep this one in order. So really interesting that I go back and forth between Pixie's artwork, right? Like there are times, like when I first got the Universal, I was like, you know, I'm not really into Pixie's artwork. It's fine, I get it. It's like, you know, what a lot of the current decks are based on, and you know, that's what a lot of the books are based on. So I had it for that reason. Although, as you may know, if you've watched my channel for some time, that's not the deck I originally learned to read on so many years ago. And I didn't originally learn tarot out of a book. I was taught by somebody. So my interpretation of the tarot is kind of like this generational version passed down, you know, through this family line. It wasn't my family, unfortunately. That would have been super cool, but it was a friend of mine, her family. And I promise I am doing a video on how I read tarot. It's actually going to be a whole series and I'm hoping to have it done this summer. But in the meantime, I have gone back and forth between how I feel about Pixie's artwork. You know, that really classic illustration of the Rider-Waite-Smith or of the Waite-Smith tarot. And so I go back and forth with it. For the longest time, I had the Universal and I was like, it's fine. It's a study deck. I'll keep it around. Then when this deck came out, I was kind of like, oh, that's cool. Like, I like that one. I like the muted colors. I like the kind of vintagey aged look of it. So, you know, I got a couple of versions of that, which I was real excited about. And I do work with this deck quite frequently. But one of the things that's been really interesting in this kind of on and off again relationship that I've had with Pixie's artwork and the Rider-Waite-Smith was actually refueled by my work with the Thoth. So it's interesting how sometimes when we work with different, let's say, systems in a sense, right? Or maybe traditions is a better word, because all of these are based on the system of tarot, the 78 cards, right? These are just different traditions. Both the Thoth and the Waite-Smith deck come out of the Golden Dawn tradition. But one of the really interesting things about spending so much time, the whole first half of the year, I've been really working with the Thoth quite a bit. I've been studying it. I use it again as a daily reader a lot of the time. I've been using this little smaller version. It's the little purple box version, although I do have all the versions, all the current available mass market versions I have. But one of the things that I thought found was really interesting, that this deck kind of feels like it has a bit more of a higher self connection, as in it connects me more to something beyond myself, even though I do use it for everyday readings. Here's the box in case you haven't seen it. And it's a deck that feels like it occupies the higher space, the higher self space. And one of the things that I kind of began to realize and appreciate about the Waite-Smith deck is that this deck for me, I don't know why I keep putting this away, but this deck for me represents more of the everyday space, the mundane world. Sylvain from Sylvain's Deadly Sins actually did a really interesting video not too long ago about the names of these decks and kind of how the names represent the different decks, and I'll leave a link to that in the description box below for you so you can check it out. But, you know, he kind of talked about the same thing that I'm talking about here, which is the Thoth feels more of like outside the world of Earth, and this feels more in the world of Earth, as in a deck of people, whereas the Thoth is kind of a deck of deity. And then, you know, he talked about the Marseille and how that's a deck of place, which is quite interesting. Again, I'll leave that below, so check that out. But one of the things that working with the Thoth made me really appreciate was the humanness in the Waite-Smith Tarot, and how beautifully this deck really does, even though I don't always agree with some of the associations because it doesn't always elementally and numerologically line up for me. But I've done so much work with this type of imagery, with this tradition of tarot, that I've been able to work my way around that just fine. Again, I'll talk about that in my How I Read Tarot series, but this whole experience has really made me appreciate the humanness of this deck. So I appreciate the higher self, or almost like divine sense of realm in, or almost like the divine realm that we see in the Thoth, and then the everyday kind of human world that we see in the Waite-Smith Tarot. So, having said all of that, I started kind of having a little bit of a love affair again with the Waite-Smith deck. I kind of took a little bit of a break from my Thoth and was like, oh, I'll get back to just working with my full-size Centennial again. Bearing in mind that I work with the Pocket Centennial every single night because I do a nightly draw with that deck. So then I went on a hunt to see what other versions of this deck there are, and I've seen these different versions that I've picked up here on various videos and on various channels. And so I was kind of looking for a Waite-Smith that, you know, had a similar kind of color palette to the Centennial, but maybe offered something a little bit different. And then I was kind of like, well, I do kind of want a more original style Rider-Waite-Smith, because these three here that I have here are all kind of that vintage vibe, right? They're made to look older, they're recolored, they're textured, they're, you know, they've had changes done to them. It's still Pixie's artwork, but the aesthetics of the deck have changed. So I did want one that was kind of like more in that original kind of art style, the original coloring. So I went with the original Rider-Waite Tarot pack. So I thought it would be fun to just kind of take a look at all of these decks side by side, and I'm just going to do a fun flip through. This is something that I wanted to do for myself, so I thought I would just go ahead and turn the camera on and we'll do it together. I'll leave timestamps in the description box below in case you want to skip around to things, but I just wanted to kind of take a look at all of these decks side by side and see how they all look in comparison to each other. Okay, so I kind of shifted them around a little bit. I had to also make sure they were all in the same order. We have the original Rider-Waite Tarot pack here on the left. We have the Smith-Waite Centennial Edition here. The Pamela Coleman Smith RWS Tarot Deck Edition here. And the Tarot Vintage here on the right-hand side. So those are the 4 different editions of the deck that I now own that we're gonna go ahead and take a fun flip through and just see how the color changes. One of the things that was really startling to me in this kind of looking at these different editions is how yellow the Centennial Edition is. Also, I just kind of want to point out that it's super cool that on the new Pamela Coleman Smith Edition and the Tarot Vintage, there's no copyright on the front of the cards, which is really, really nice. So I just thought we would hang out. I just want to kind of see all of these cards next to each other. Clearly you can see that there is this whole desaturation thing going on across these kind of vintagey style ones. Although now looking at it in comparison to these two decks, the Centennial Edition doesn't look that saturated now. I don't know how close to the original colorway we have with the original Rider-Waite Smith here this deck here. I don't know how close it is because I don't have any of the vintage or original RWS decks. I do have one that I did manage to get a hold of, but it is not here yet, and I didn't want to hold up this video waiting for it to eventually arrive. But it's kind of interesting to see like how vibrant these colors are in this deck, and then kind of just look, it looks almost like the let's see if I can do this in order. The Centennial version almost just has this like yellow filter put over the top of it. And then when we get to the to this edition here, the Pamela Coleman Smith deck, we see that the artwork has been desaturated. Now, the other thing that's really interesting about this Pamela Coleman Smith one is it does actually look like the cards have been maybe not cropped, but rescaled and not keeping the proportions, because you can see that very clearly here in this Wheel of Fortune card. These two circles are quite round and this circle is a little bit more kind of egg shape, and here we see that again in the Vintage Tarot. Now these two are smaller decks, so perhaps they did that kind of shrinking, the resizing of the imagery to make it fit the size of the cards. I do love the size of the cards in these two decks, but I just thought that was interesting that there's definitely been some changing of the size of the artwork. Again, I think they're trying to retain as much of it as they can, but just putting it on that smaller cardstock or cards that have a little bit different size ratio. So I kind of love it. I love the kind of shift that we get. I have to tell you that I actually am kind of loving this version in terms of the color, because it's very gray and black and all those desaturated colors that I love. Although I do enjoy the bolder version of the original Rider-Waite Smith over here. And when I say original, because that's the name on the deck itself, it is called the original Rider-Waite Tarot pack. Somebody who maybe knows better than me might be able to say whether or not that is. I have no idea about all the different editions. I'm trying to educate myself on that, but I'm in no way an expert. I do believe that like there's like a 1901 edition, and I think a couple of these decks are based on that, but I couldn't tell you what that difference actually is at this point. So again, that's something that I personally need to just educate myself on a little bit more, but I thought it'd just be fun to flip through. Actually, I look at that sun card. I really like the colors in the Tarot Vintage too. I love the parchment paper. I do want to kind of play with the cardstock when we're done here and see how they each shuffle. But I just wanted to do this little flip through and see how the color looks across all the different cards. Obviously the illustrations are the same. Interesting here how there's no color really in the swirl here in these decks. Like, right, it's just the clouds and you can see the background color coming through. But in this deck, that cloud has been colored, which is quite interesting. Make some space, otherwise my piles are gonna get to be too big. I'm gonna try to not make this take forever, but like I said, there's timestamps in the description box below, so if you want to jump to the end, feel free. I just wanted to kind of sit here and really look at the color difference. The interesting thing about the Tarot Vintage is that even though it's vintage, it's actually less muted than the Pamela Coleman Smith version that we see here. So while it's using a muted color palette, it does have a very, very saturated colors, which I kind of quite dig. It's really hard for me to kind of say which is my favorite, although I do like this one, and I do think I will probably put most of these decks into use, because they all have a slightly different energy, which is quite cool. It's really interesting putting the original Rider-Waite-Smith pack next to the Centennial because they are very close in color, and it just does look like the Centennials just had like a white or a yellow wash put over them. Maybe the colors have been slightly muted. I mean, if you're really looking into the details, you can catch those. Again, just, you know, there's subtle differences here. There's even color differences, because you can see here the shirt is red, the flowers are red, and the kind of whatever this overlay here is green. In this one, it's kind of more of a red and blue, and this one it's kind of a soft muted maroon and blue, and then here we have a really stark maroon and blue. So it's really interesting how the colors kind of shift and change. I do think that it makes it feel, even though we're looking at the same decks with the same artwork, of course, it does make them feel a little bit different. And hopefully this isn't like just completely boring you to death, but again, feel free to skip ahead. I just wanted to take a look at all of these. That king wanted to come away and see what the differences were. So look at here in the background, like again, just subtle differences. There's some white in these sails. So some of them are red, some of them are white. Here they're all red. Here they're, again, that kind of muted red. And here they don't have any color. You're just seeing the background color come through. So I haven't ever really taken a really good in-depth look at the different versions of Pixie's artwork here, the different versions of the Rider-Waite-Smith that are available. And I think it's kind of cool. It's kind of fun to be able to look and see what the differences are, because there is definitely differences. I'm throwing cards on the floor here. Try not to let the piles in front of me get too terribly big, or I'll have a tower of cards careening to the floor. I already have a tower of cards off to the side here. That's pretty cool. You can definitely see that in the Centennial, like the snow is yellow too, right? So here it's very white, here it's yellow, here it's kind of a light gray. And then here again, we have that beigey color, but again, kind of yellowy paper looking, right? Because it's the vintage tarot. So it's meant to look like an old kind of tea-stained deck. So yeah, I mean, obviously I could have thrown music on, but I figured I'd just ramble and we'll just talk about kind of anything that comes to mind as I'm flipping through this deck. Or these decks. Look at the color variation in his shirt. These two are fairly close, but it's green over here, and it's blue, and it's blue, and it's really blue. So also look at, okay, like a lot of things. There's a lot of changes, right? So we have red here, kind of this browny maroon color, and then no color in his pants there. So quite interesting. I'm thinking, yeah, look at the color difference here in the flowers. So here we have just a tiny hint of that green color in the middle of the flowers. It's more predominant in this one. Again, the colors are muted here, and then we don't have anything on her dress in this one, so that's quite interesting. Subtle changes. And the curious thing is, so when we have changes like that, where like her dress has totally changed, right? Here it's got flowers on it, here it's a totally different color and doesn't even have anything on it. Like, is that still considered Pixie's artwork, right? There is a line, and I'm asking that like not facetiously, I'm like legitimately asking, because there is like a point where if you change enough of things, it doesn't retain the original energy of the cards. And so I'm just kind of curious of what you think, you know, if you're still here, if you're still with me through this whole rambly mess. You know, do you think that the color shifting and the changing some of the designs and things like that, does it shift it too far away from Pixie's artwork? What is with those kings? They do not want to stay put. So just curious kind of what you think. Oh my gosh, I have a tower of crisscrossed cards over to the side here. Look at the difference in the colors here. We have like a tan and a green, a brown and a blue, a gray and a blue, and a blue and a blue. So interesting how there are very subtle coloration changes. And again, maybe everybody knows this, and this is just like only new to me because I've never really had more than one edition of the Rider-Waite-Smith, because I've always been like, I only need one, right? I need one to read with, and I need one that I keep in order for reference purposes if I'm doing some sort of work and I want to compare a card, or I want to, I don't know, maybe use it in a video or something. It's nice to have at least one RWS like in order. Same reason I keep one Thoth in order, so that I can use it as a reference deck. But I've never had more than the one edition or one type of the RWS at a time. And so I've never had the opportunity to compare them and to see what subtle differences there are across the different decks. Again, we're still looking at the same artwork, right? It's not like the illustrations have changed. It's mostly the colors have changed, although in the Tarot Vintage there, we have had some changes in the kind of subtle designs or decorative elements within the cards. So that's kind of interesting. So just curious what you think of the whole, you know, multiple versions of this deck and the different colorations. Is that something that you like, that you have, that you enjoy? Or are you kind of in the boat where I was kind of originally like, I only need one RWS with Pixie's artwork, right? Or I guess 2 copies, but same edition. Technically, I have 3 copies of the Centennial because, again, I have the working large one that I use. I have this one that is my reference deck. And then I have my little tin version, which lives in my bedroom for my nighttime reads. Okay, I think we're down to the last suit. So anyway, yeah, I'd be curious to know what you think. We'll just try to flip real quick. This is going to be a long video, but like I said, I'll leave timestamps. Y'all can skip around. It won't hurt my feelings any. I just really wanted to take a moment and flip through each of these decks and be able to see them. I also like, just to be perfectly honest, having kind of this video reference diary sort of being able to look at these side by side. So, you know, it's something that I too can come back and look at if I'm, I don't know, feeling the need to decide which one I want to use, or maybe I'm just like, what were the differences between those? And I don't want to necessarily get all the decks out and do this again. Now I kind of have this as like a video reference. It also might be a good reference if you're like trying to decide which of these versions maybe that you'd like to have. Granted, this is not all of the versions of the RWS by any stretch of the imagination, but these were the only ones that I was really interested in. I know there's the Radiant, and I apologize, the window's open and there's people making noise. Just go ahead and shut the window because somebody is making noise out there. But there's also the Radiant, the newer Radiant Wise, which I think is based on the Dirty Pam, as it's become known in the community. I have no idea which Pam that is. There's like the Pam, I think A, B, and C. Although again, I could be wrong because I am definitely not an expert in the RWS, because it's really not a deck that I've worked with very much. But anyway, there's lots of different editions of this, and these are just the 4 that I have. Oh my goodness, look what I did here. Let's sort that out while we just chat, because that is what this whole video is gonna be about, is just hanging out and playing with some RWS decks and kind of just seeing what we think and comparing the different versions and all of the good things. Now, I have to tell ya, I'm super excited about this one. This Pamela Coleman Smith one is is the one that I was personally most excited to check out. Let's take a look at the backs. Let's talk about the backs real quick before we move on to cardstock. I apologize for all the loudness if you can hear that. My neighbors are having some yard work done and it's right outside my window. Okay, oh, what did I do? Look at that. Alrighty, let's stack them up here and let's talk about these backs. So these are the backs on the original Rider-Waite Smith pack. I think these backs are, they're nice. It's not my favorite color and it doesn't really go with the whole aesthetic of the deck. But when you look at older decks, like the backgrounds don't often match the fronts. So it's like just some random pattern. I mean, this is not random. It's like the death flower and the lilies and stuff, right? I mean, I think there's meaning to this, just like there's meaning to the Thoth back. But the color choice is interesting because it doesn't at all match the deck. Here we have the Centennial back, which does actually match the aesthetic of the deck. I do really love this back on this particular deck. We have Pixie Signature and the Death Flower. I don't know if there's an actual name for that, but anyway, I think it's quite beautiful. Obviously, I have the bordered edition. There is a borderless edition of this, but I like the bordered edition because I'm weird like that. So on the, we'll talk about copyright a little bit too, because these two have copyrights on the front. These two do not have copyrights on the front, but the Pamela Coleman Smith Tarot does have copyright on the back of the card. So it's here and here, which is, I think, again, ridiculous. I don't know why we put copyrights on the cards. They're very easy to remove. They're certainly easy to remove if you're, using a digital version. If you're going to do some nefarious things with this deck. But anyway, these backs are not my favorite. I do like the background color, but I feel like this back could have been incorporated into this. That kind of a design, right, could have been incorporated into this and it would have been a much better, a much better look at, or a much better match, because again, I feel like the backs don't really match, right? Aesthetically speaking, it's like the swords and the wands and the cup, like they're not even the same ones that we see here, because you can see the wands don't have any of the kind of hatch marks on them, neither do the swords or anything. So it's just, I don't know, it's a weird choice, weird design choice. This is my absolute favorite back. And that's the reason why I bought this deck, I'll be perfectly honest, because I love the backs of these cards. I wish that all of these had backs like this in matching colors. And that would have been fantastic. But they didn't ask me when they designed the back of these cards, so. But again, being perfectly honest, I bought the vintage tarot because of these absolutely gorgeous backs. They're my favorites. They might be my favorites of like any of my decks. I don't know, there's just something really cool and powerful about them. Definitely my least favorite over here, but anyway, so okay, let's just, I'm gonna mix up my reference deck, but we're gonna do it. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm gonna swap decks because I can, because I have multiples. So I do want to keep my reference deck in order. So let's swap it for my reading deck, because I do want to give all of these a shuffle. I have no intention of keeping these ones like in any sort of order. Again, I have my Centennial for a reference deck if I need, although depending on how this deck works out, I may end up using it instead. Who knows? So let's talk about the cardstock. I'm going to start with this one because I know what the cardstock is on this deck. It is that US Games cardboardy cardstock. Are these all by US Games? Really? Dropping all the title cards. Yep, US Games. Oh, nope, the Tarot Vintage is by Los Scarabeo. Okay, so the Centennial, the original, and the Pamela Coleman Smith, all by US Games, and the Los Scarabeo, or the Tarot Vintage is by Los Scarabeo. I don't even have that one on on camera, but that's okay. All right, so the Centennial is on this kind of cardboardy cardstock. This one is a little bit of a stretch for me to shuffle, and it's quite stiff, although I can riffle shuffle it and I can bridge it, and that's really lovely. It is a bit of a stiffer shuffle, but again, I've used it enough that, it's a little bit broken. Although I do definitely have to say that I use my pocket version more than this one because that one I use every single night. Okay, so I know what that one shuffles like. If you've seen this deck, you may know, you may have it, so you may know what that one shuffles like as well. So this one is the original Waitsmith, which again feels like the exact same cardstock as the Centennial, maybe a touch thinner, just a touch. So let's give it a shuffle and see how it goes. Yeah, I feel like it might be just a tad thinner, which is good. It's a little bit of an easier shuffle for me. Size-wise as well as being able to get my hands around it, it's a little bit more comfortable. So there's that one. We're just totally having like an RWS little nerd fest here. Okay, so this one is the Pamela Coleman Smith, and this feels nice. It is thin, it is flexible, it still feels sturdy. It's also, I think, not as... Yeah, it's a little bit, it's judging by the height of them because they all have the same amount of cards, right? It's the shortest of them all, so the cardstock isn't as thick. Oh yeah, that's a beautiful shuffle. I think I really am leaning towards this one. Might end up being my everyday reader kind of RWS, because that's a really, really good shuffle. It's got a nice bend, it's got a nice shuffle. Gorgeous. Okay, so there's that one. I love the shuffle in that. Okay, so Tarot Vintage. This is a Lo Scarabeo, so it's a different kind of cardstock, but honestly, it does feel quite a bit like, feels like this one. It's such a weird tactile thing, right? It is, I think, smaller. So let's just do a comparison. These two are the same size. This one is maybe, woo, if I could get them all to line up. Okay, so the Pamela Coleman Smith one is just the teeny tiniest bit. I don't know if you can even see it, but just the teeny tiniest bit smaller. And then you can see the Tarot Vintage is even, it's the same height as the others. Oh, nope, it's not. It's a little bit shorter and quite a bit narrower. Again, that's kind of typical of Lo Scarabeo decks. I do really like their decks, and I generally like their cardstock. So it's got a nice bend to it, nice flex. It's not too thick. I think it would be like the, yeah, it's a little shorter than this one. So if you're judging by cardstock, you can kind of tell by how tall they stack up, right? So these two are the same height. This one's a tiny bit shorter. This one would be just slightly shorter than these two. So I'm just totally having a nerd moment. I hope you don't mind. This one, because again, it's a little bit smaller and it is on that kind of cardboardy cardstock, is a little bit of a stiffer shuffle, but also bearing in mind that all of these decks are new. Well, okay, this one's not, but these three decks are new, so they haven't been broken in at all. So there is that. Okay. So not a bad shuffle. It's a nice size. It's a little bit stiff, but that will probably work itself out and kind of break in. Okay, let's do, let's just pull a couple cards from each because I don't know, because I want to, because it'll be fun. All right, so let's pull 3 cards from our Centennial. Hopefully I can do some editing magic so that this video isn't totally a snooze fest. Beautiful. We got the 7 of Pentacles, the 7 of Swords, and Temperance. It's quite interesting. They are lovely on the table. I do really enjoy the kind of yellowy, vintagey version. Again, this one kind of has like a little bit of a special place in my heart, so to speak, because it was the first Rider-Waite-Smith deck with Pixie's artwork that I really felt like I had any sort of a connection to, that I like really enjoyed reading with. And it really was the first deck that kind of made me go, okay, yeah, I can see the charm here, right? I can see why people love it. So that's the Centennial version. Let's go ahead and do the original Rider-Waite-Smith pack. I guess we've already shuffled, so we can just pull cards off the top. How about they not be upside down, because we don't need... Oh, look what I did. Okay, gonna have to fix this deck because I don't read reversals. So we got the Ace of Pentacles, the Nine of Swords, and the Six of Wands. I mean, there is definitely something to be said for this kind of beautiful, bright color palette on your table. It really does, especially because, you know, I have my white table here. It really does stand out beautifully against that kind of a lighter reading table. So I can see how when you're doing a really nice big spread, a deck like this with these beautiful colors would actually be fantastic because it would stand out really well. I do really like the coloration on this deck. I did watch a lot of walkthroughs and go through a lot of images because there are so many different versions of the Rider-Waite-Smith and so many different colorations that I did do quite a bit of research. This has been like kind of a thing that I've been working on for the last like couple of weeks, just kind of doing all this research and kind of trying to decide which ones that I wanted to get. And, you know, all of this is coming out of my kind of renewed love affair with the Rider-Waite-Smith and my appreciation really for this deck and this artwork after working with the Thoth. And that's kind of quite interesting, but yeah, I really like the coloration. The backs are my least favorite out of all of them, but the coloration of this deck is quite beautiful, and I do actually like it better than the Centennial, and not quite as much as the Pamela Coleman Smith one. But again, beautiful coloration in that deck. Like I was looking at that one compared to the Radiant Wise Spirit, I think is what it's called now. The one that's based on the Dirty Pam. And to me, that coloration doesn't quite work for me. And this is kind of along those lines, but it definitely works better for me. So now we have the Pamela Coleman Smith one, and I think this one might be my favorite. Ooh, look, I got all majors. So we got the Wheel, the Lovers, and the Hermit. The only thing that I was a little bit concerned about with this particular coloration is that it might just blend in with my table, and that the cards might blend into each other, right? So if we're looking at like in comparison to like these cards, right, that stand out and they're really bold and beautiful, I was a little bit worried that if, you know, I'm doing larger readings with this, that if I get too many of these cards on the table, they would just kind of wash each other out. But there's something so soothing and inviting about this coloration of it. I do have to say that I absolutely love the gray hue. I mean, I love gray. Like, if you hadn't been able to tell, I love gray. I love muted color palettes. I'm like a sucker for any deck with a muted color palette. And this one is just so right up my alley in so many ways. So I'm like real excited, and I can tell you right now that this one is gonna be my kind of everyday reader for a while. And it's gonna kind of, my Centennial is gonna take a back seat to this one for a little bit. I can just tell you that's gonna happen. This one, again, has my all-time favorite backs. I love the backs on this deck. But I do actually quite like the coloration. It does offer, I think, something a little bit different than we see in the other decks, right? It's kind of got that washed out look or that vintage look of the Centennial, but the colors themselves are actually quite vibrant. So it's like the background is that vintage style, but the colors themselves do pop a lot more. So, you know, if we compare that to the Centennial here, you can see that it has kind of the same type of aesthetic in a way, but the colors on the outfits and the pentacles and things like that, they are a bit more vibrant, I think, in the Tarot Vintage, and especially, you know, compared to the Pamela Coleman Smith deck here. Again, both very muted color palettes in a sense, both very washed out vintagey style, but in the Tarot Vintage, those predominant colors, those main colors pop more. And if you work with color in a deck, that might be really interesting because the color definitely draws your eye. I do really like the coloration of this deck. I like the colors that have been used, as in, you know, we have kind of these burgundies and browns and oranges and blues, a bit more of that kind of muted color palette, a little bit, but it does definitely pop here and there. So it's a really interesting blend, actually, I think, of kind of the Centennial and the Pamela Coleman Smith deck. It's kind of an interesting blend of the two. So I don't know how often I will work with this one. This is like beautiful backs. It's got a beautiful box. Like, this is the only one that I'm planning to keep it in its actual box because it has a really nice, beautiful box. The rest of them I will be making bags for. But I don't know how much I will be using this one. But I do like the coloration on it. Like, I think it's really cool. So yeah, I mean, where I'm kind of at right now is I'm loving them all. I'll just be perfectly honest. I feel like my Centennial, because I've had it the longest and these three are new, I feel like it's probably gonna like take a back seat for a little while I spend some time getting to know these decks, but not really, because the tin version is still, the little mini version is still in my bedroom and still will probably always live in there. And this is one of my main decks that I work with in that version of it. So I don't foresee like the Centennial on the whole going away, because none of these are available in a tin, and I really love the tin version for my evening readings. But I'm real excited to work with these and to give them a try. I feel like, let's just kind of, I flip them over. I mean, I feel like kind of a broken record now at this point, but I'm just kind of excited to play with these and to have some fun with them. I mean, we'll turn the Centennial around, but again, this one's kind of like old hat, which is funny because I think this version's actually the oldest of the editions. This one says 2009. So we have 1999, 2009, 2020, and 2021. So yeah, I'm real excited. I don't know. Can you tell? Like, I'm super excited to play with these. Again, I'm having a kind of a revived appreciation for the Rider-Waite-Smith, in particular for Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork. There is something very charming, very human about her art style, and it does kind of bring the tarot into the kind of everyday realm, which I do really appreciate. I do love working with my Thoth as well, and it definitely takes me to a different place. And I have lots of RWS based decks that I enjoy working with, but there is something kind of soothing and comforting and sort of palate cleansing about working with Pamela's artwork. And I think that's because it's so ingrained in our tarot culture nowadays. This is the deck that most people expect to see when they go get a reading. This is the deck that we see a lot of times on like TV shows and in pop culture references and things like that. I mean, sometimes we see the Marseille, but oftentimes it's the Rider-Waite-Smith. So these are the images that we know. These are the images that a lot of people have learned from. And so I'm just, kind of taking a moment to appreciate that and enjoying kind of spending some time kind of reacquainting myself with Pixie's artwork. So I'm definitely excited to work with these three versions. I will definitely let you know how it goes. If you've stuck with me this long, or even if you skipped ahead, I don't blame you, but thank you so much for joining me today. As always, my friends, you'll find links for everything I have talked about here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.